Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. So today is Pastor Appreciation Sunday, I think. It was... What's so funny?
It's not me.
So I think it was mentioned a little bit last week when we did a presentation to Jamie, who's working with the kids, that October is generally recognized as Pastor Appreciation Month. So the local advisory council of the church, of which I'm a member of, has determined that today we would honor our pastor and his family as part of Pastor Appreciation. So there's a couple things that we're going to do. One I just wanted to mention, Derek presented in the first service, and I was back with the life group in the back room back there, and a couple times I heard people screaming really loud. So I'm going to give you a chance to do that too. You'll get 2 opportunities, okay? So first of all, I'm going to ask Jess to come up here, and when she comes up, I'd like you to scream as loud as you could, okay? Ready? Okay, go ahead. Come on. All right, thanks. They said I have no clue what they were screaming about in first service, but it sounded like a fun thing to do, so.
That's what I do every morning when she wakes up. Yeah!
Yeah. All right, so secondly, you know, the past few years we've always done the same thing for Pastor Appreciation, just collect a lot of money and hand it to you during the service, and you know money's nice, but you know, we never really talk a lot about how much we appreciate you. So I have asked people to give me words of appreciation that I can share with you guys. So this is what I have. I'm not going to read it all today. For instance, there's one here that says something about you being hairless. I'm not going to read that at all. There's another one that talks about your poor taste in pizza, and I'm not going to mention that either because, yeah, that's pretty personal.
I'm pretty sure I know who they both were.
So I'm going to start. There's one that talks. Let me read this one first. It says, I really appreciate Pastor Josh's humility. He is a very humble guy. I think it's one of his greatest strengths as a pastor. And I do agree with this one. I'm not here to make fun of it or anything. But I just want you to still be humble after I read the rest of them. Okay, because, you know, and I do think all of these, as I got them in email, that they resonate with me, you know, both for both of you. I think they're things that I appreciate. I think we're all kind of on the same page here. But just to read a couple, 4 in fact. One says, I appreciate the Woods family for all the tireless effort they put into the Awaken community. And I think, you know, that's something that we all feel. Josh and Jess have been some of the largest influences of my personal and spiritual growth since I moved to the Capital District. They continually go above and beyond to help me and my family. And I am so thankful for their leadership in the church and their friendship in my life. Another one says, we appreciate the insight and passion you bring to fulfilling our mission to awaken new hearts to Christ. And the last one, I appreciate Pastor Josh and view him not just as a pastor, but as a friend. I appreciate the job that he has done at our church and the attitude that he has had through different situations. I appreciate the Woods hospitality and their ministry in our church. And I think those 4 pretty much summarize the others. And, you know, just here to say, on behalf of everyone, thanks for all you do here. We really appreciate it. So as I give these, I was going to ask you to do your second scream as I give them these. So again, thank you for all you guys do. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Oh, I got a long one coming up. So, no, thank everybody so much. Every year that we experience this, we're blown away and we're grateful very, very grateful and thankful to be here and a part of the Awaken team. And I do feel like we're just, playing our part, and everybody has a part to play, every single one of us. And so I'm excited about where we are and what God's doing here, and I'm excited that we had an opportunity to make the kids downstairs hear us for once and say, what was that? So anyway, thank you guys so very much. And here we are, week 5 of a series that we were doing called Follow the Leader. And we took a 1-week hiatus last Sunday. And let me tell you just a little bit about last weekend as we get started today. Last weekend on Saturday, we hosted the Awaken Church Block Party. And this is the 3rd time we've done it. And I'm blown away every year that literally hundreds of people from our community come here. And it's just an opportunity for us to be able to serve them and pour love upon them. And it's incredible. And so just you guys ready? One more hand clap and scream for the team that put this together and made it happen. It's absolutely incredible to see. And I get blown away every year when somebody walks up to me and says, okay, so how much does this cost? And I'm like, well, the banner said free, so I'm pretty sure it's free. They're like, yeah, we know it's free to get in, but how much for the food and how much for the rides? I'm like, actually, they didn't tell me everything, but I'm pretty sure it's all free, right? And it blows my mind every year that we're able to, multiple times a year, do things like this for our community till it's become a point where people are expecting it, counting on it for their families, and I love that we can be that part of the community here. And so, fantastic job. And then on Sunday morning, it was our Awaken family experience where we got to experience what our kids are learning every single week. And I love the fact that our kids are learning exciting things about Jesus every single Sunday to the point where they're remembering it, they're remembering the songs, and it's absolutely incredible. They did a song, they started learning it, that we do up here called Open Up the Heavens. You guys are familiar with that? This week, one of my kids walked up to the freezer and said, open up the freezer. I want some ice cream. I was like, first of all, he's learning from me and from the kids downstairs. It's going great. Yeah. So anyway, exciting weekend. And we are in week 5 of this series. And so far, what we've learned in Follow the Leader, just to kind of get all of our memories going back here, is that there are some different people that follow Jesus. There was this one group of people that were like the super religious elite group of people that followed Jesus around. But they didn't follow Jesus around because they wanted to follow Jesus. They followed Jesus because they wanted to trap him in something that he said or did so they could have him arrested and killed. And eventually they succeeded. And then there was this other group of people that was kind of the crowd, right? They followed Jesus around simply because they liked the cool things that Jesus did and the cool things that Jesus said. That they liked the fact that Jesus could make bread from nothing. Boom, garlic knots for everybody. Here we go. They liked the fact that he could make water into wine. They were like, we're going to follow you everywhere, right? And they loved a lot of the things that he said, but when he said difficult things, they were like, yeah, we got to go home, let our dog out, stuff like that. We're not going to stick around with this anymore. But then there was this other group of people that we refer to in the New Testament as the disciples. It was a group of 12 guys and a handful of other people as well who followed Jesus around because he invited them into a relationship with him, that he was going to allow them to be his disciples, his learners, his students, his followers. And they literally followed him around, learning from him, learning to become more like him. And it changed their lives and they changed the world. And what we have decided in this series is that these are the kind of disciples that we want to be. We want to be the people who follow Jesus because we want to learn and become more like him. Not that we're going to get it perfect every time, but that our desire is to become more and more like him. And I asked you to do something all the way at the beginning of this series. I asked you to commit to this series. I asked you to commit to being here every single Sunday if you could. If you've made it, congratulations. If you haven't, you can go online and check it out, anything that you have missed. And so far what we've learned is that the most important thing is that you are invited into a relationship with Jesus, a journey with Jesus, to be his disciple, no matter who you are, no matter what your past is like, no matter what your current is like. You have an opportunity to be a Jesus follower. So I would encourage you right now, if you haven't yet, go and make sure that you check out anything that you have missed from this series. Everybody good? Okay, today we're going to be in John chapter 13, 14, 15-ish, somewhere in that range. And here's the deal. There were 2 really long speeches that Jesus gave that we have recorded. The first one was what we call the Sermon on the Mount, and it was found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, the first book of the New Testament. And he really sat down with his disciples, but there were a lot of other people there, and he taught a lot of incredible things during this time. But then there was this other time. It was kind of like right before he was about to be arrested and ultimately crucified, where he set his disciples down, and there was nobody else with them. It was just the 12 of them in this room, and he sat down and he had this long conversation with them. I say conversation. They'll occasionally ask a question, but he did a lot of the talking, and he kept coming back to this theme over and over again. He wouldn't let it go. I don't know, how many people in the room have like small kids? Yeah, okay, a few of you. How many of you remember when you had small kids? Yeah, a few more. So imagine this, like if you wanted to get your kids to do something, do you tell them once? No, it doesn't work, right? When you tell them the first time, that's just like, even no matter what they were doing before, they're actually going to go and do the opposite of what you said, even if they weren't planning on doing the opposite before, because you said to do it, right? It takes over and over again. And I think Jesus may have thought of his disciples kind of like toddlers. And he looked at them and he said, I want you to understand something. This is so important. I've got to say it more than once. Matter of fact, it's going to be the theme that you are going to have to carry with you. And if you want to be my disciple, you're going to have to get this down. And I want to read you the second time he told them. Then I'm going to read to you the first time he told them. So the first time that you're hearing it is going to be the second time that they heard it. Everybody got it? On the same page? Because the first time is a little too overwhelming. I'm not sure you're ready for it yet. You have to hear it the second time first. Then you're going to hear it the first time. Because the first time, it was absolutely shocking to everybody who heard it, all 12 of them. And I'm afraid it's going to be too shocking to you. So we got to go in shifts here. You guys ready? John chapter 15, if you have your Bible. We're going to read verse 12. It says this. My command is this. Love each other as I have loved you. Doesn't seem so bad, right? I mean, even if you've been in church for any length of time at all, you may have heard this. My command, love other people, right? I mean, even if you're not a church person, this is like the first time you've ever been in church, you've probably at least assumed that Jesus had something to do with love, right? I mean, that was probably a safe assumption. And so this doesn't seem that intense. But man, when the disciples heard this for the very first time, the way that you're about to hear it for the very first time, it challenged them to their core, and I hope and I pray it's challenged me to my core as I've thought about it all week, and I hope and I pray that it challenges you to your core. Are you guys ready for this? Man, you don't look ready. None of you are talking back except for one of you. He's already heard it. Come on. Are you guys ready for this? All right. John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. Again, this is going to challenge you. Are we ready? Jesus says this. A new command I give you. New, meaning revolutionary, brand new. Nobody else has said this. A new command I give you. Love one another. Now, I bet his disciples were sitting there thinking like, I'm not so sure that's brand new. You may have heard that somewhere before. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And then in verse 35, he says something truly extraordinary. He says, by this, by you loving one another, everyone, say everyone. Come on, say everyone like you mean it. Everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. See, your mind isn't as blown as theirs was. Here's the thing. At this, like these comments that Jesus made, it really brings up a couple of big questions. Question number one is, really, is this a new commandment? Like, is this I'm not so sure this is brand new, Jesus. As a matter of fact, if we go all the way back to Levitical law, and I'm sure that all of you have studied up on Levitical law over the last week, but if you go all the way back to Leviticus in chapter 19, you're going to see, and Leviticus was as old as Israel. It literally was as old as Moses, right? It literally was old. And so there was a command all the way back in Levitical law, thousands of years before this moment, that went something like this in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people. That's good advice, by the way. But love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So is loving people really a new commandment that just Jesus came up with? Technically it is, but we're not going that far back into our theological thinking here. Yes, this is not a new commandment, but rather the way in which Jesus describes how we're supposed to love, the way that we measure our love for other people is what Jesus is making brand new. Because it used to be to love your neighbor as yourself, and Jesus looked down and he was like, you guys didn't do a great job of that. So I'm going to make this as crystal clear as I can possibly make it. As I have loved you, that's how you're supposed to love one another. And this is how everybody is going to know that you are my followers. Now, this was very, very radical, very, very different. Because you know how people knew that people were followers of God or believers in God before? It was this thing called the temple model. Everybody say temple model. Killing me, guys. Temple model. The temple model was the Old Testament model of worship where people would come in and they would worship in a sacred place, right? They would worship in a sacred place called the temple, or before the temple it was the tabernacle, and they set up these sacred places all over the place. You would go in, and that's where you were able to meet with God. You could do sacrifices, right, with animals right there before God on an altar, and you would be able to worship him. That's where you worshiped, and you did it by reading sacred texts that most people probably couldn't even read, but the priests would read them, and usually in a language that you might not even be able to read or understand, and they would read them, and you would learn in these sacred places from these sacred texts, and not like text messages on your phone, but like sacred documents, and you would learn from sacred people, always men. And Jesus said, listen, I want to upgrade our model of worship, because it used to be that if you wanted to know if a person was a believer or follower of God, you would ask them, do you go to temple? Did you see the priest? That's how you know whether a person is a follower of God. And Jesus said, time out, we're going to upgrade that. And we're going to say, if you want to know if a person is actually a follower of God, what you're going to ask them is, or you're not even going to ask them anything, you're going to look at how well they love other people. That's going to be how they determine whether or not you are actually a follower of Jesus or not. Now, let me ask you kind of a related question here. If you're going to find out from a person today whether they are a follower of Jesus, what might be the first question you ask them? Where do you go to church? You see, for some reason, we've kind of let this temple model begin to creep back in, even though Jesus made it very clear that the way that we're supposed to find out who is a follower of his is by how well they love one another. And so we'll come back more to this idea of temple worship in just a minute, because it's extremely important. Now, the second question that this kind of brings up is this. If we're supposed to love like Jesus loved, well, how did Jesus love the disciples? Like, how did he go about doing that? What was that like? What did it look like? Well, I wrote down 5 quick things here for you. Number 1 is that he served them. Do you guys realize the context of John chapter 13 through 17 is that Jesus had just washed his disciples' feet? He had just washed it. And you may think to yourself, well, that's not such a big deal. But I want you to understand that the sense of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Cleanliness and the sense of hygiene that we currently have in the 21st century wasn't quite up to standard in the first century. And these guys walked around in dirt and mud with sandals on all day long. And so it was a little more disgusting when you think about Jesus getting into a small room with 12 guys and washing their feet. It was kind of gross to think about. But he said, I'm going to serve you. And you can look at his ministry all through his life that we have recorded, and you can see over and over again that he served people. Matter of fact, he straight up said, I did not come to be served, but to serve. That was his life. That was who he was. He served them. And it kind of goes along with the second thing, is that he leveraged what he had, everything that he had, his abilities, his wealth, his intelligence, everything that he had, he leveraged it for their needs, which is the complete opposite of what we think to do. Like when we have money, power, or intelligence, we think to use it for ourselves. That's kind of the human way. Jesus said, no, I'm going to use everything. I have all the intelligence in the world, but I put myself in this room to serve you right now. I have all the money. Do you guys realize the business model that Jesus could have had? Making bread out of nothing, selling it over and over again. Go to the river, get a bucket of water, let's turn it into water. He had an unending business model, but he chose to leverage what he had and all the power that he had, which was infinite, into a small group of people to love and serve them. That was crazy. Or how about this? Think about this. He actually, number 3, shared in their pain and sorrow. He entered in to their lives, and he felt their heartache and their heartbreak. There was this verse just a couple chapters before John chapter 13 when he started all this, where it's the shortest verse in the entire Bible. It says that Jesus wept. Jesus actually cried. You guys familiar with that verse? And you have to think about why he cried. And the funny thing is that he was going to this graveside where somebody had died, and he knew the family, and the family was all out there crying. But Jesus knew something that they did not know. Jesus knew that he was about to raise him from the dead. So if I was Jesus and I was approaching, I would probably be like, I'm less about the crying, and I'm going to get more straight to the raising, right? But Jesus walked right up to him and started crying. Why? Because he felt their heartbreak. He entered into their world. And Jesus said, if you want to be my followers and you want people to know that you're my followers, you have to love people like I've loved you. It was revolutionary. It changed everything. Or how about this? Number 4, he actually lived among them. Do you guys realize how big of a deal this was? Like, Jesus could have looked down from heaven and just been like, hey, you guys are good now. I love you from a distance. We're all good. I'll see you in a few years. He could have done that. But he didn't. He said, I'm going to come down there and become one of you. It was absolutely extraordinarily amazing. And then number 5, he did something that they could not do for themselves. He bridged the gap to get to them. They could not figure it out on themselves, no matter how much of the law they tried to learn. He could not. They couldn't do it on their own. He bridged the gap. And so Jesus gathers them together. And he says, listen, as I have loved you, you now have to go and love other people. And man, he could not have been any more clear about this. And these guys, they got it. Even the Apostle Paul, who wasn't in the room this day, but he really started to understand this. And if there was ever a guy who would benefit more from the temple model other than Paul, I would like to know who it was. He was called a Pharisee among Pharisees. That means that he was like the top of the line Pharisee, whatever that is, right? And he benefited from the temple model more than anybody did. And you know what he said about this whole thing that Jesus was talking about? You're going to love this. It's great. He said these words in Galatians chapter 5. He said, for in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. Okay, you guys don't understand this yet because you should have been like, yes! But most of you are like, that's gross. Why are we talking about this? So here's the deal. This was their covenant with God from all the way back when Abraham was alive. You're talking a lot of centuries have gone by to this moment. And this was their covenant between God and them, that they were going to be his people. This was the covenant, circumcision. And Paul, who's benefited more from that than almost anybody, gets up and says, everything that you have poured your entire heart into, your whole religion, everything between you and God, yeah, it's worthless. Doesn't mean anything anymore. Because the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through what? It's faith expressing itself through love. Paul took seriously these words that Jesus had given about loving people. He said the most important thing is how you love other people. And it changed everything in the church, man. These guys, Peter, James, and John, they got this. This was rooted deep in their soul. As a matter of fact, just to go back to the previous point about how much Jesus loved them, you guys realize that one of those people that he was teaching this to and that he was serving would actually go on to betray him? I mean, it was unbelievable the way that Jesus loved them. And these guys, they caught that vision. And the church would go on to do things. These guys, Peter, James, and John, they would go on to do things that were so extraordinary. There are tales of how the early church, they would take people and babies and kids off the streets who had been abandoned for whatever reason. They would take them in and love them. They literally sold everything that they had, all of their possessions, to give to make sure that widows and elderly people had food. It was unbelievable how they took the words of Jesus to heart to make sure that they were loving one another really well. And so the church, as a result, began to grow in ways that they could not imagine, and never has it grown at that pace since. It grew by leaps and bounds, and over the first few years, 30, 40, 50 years go by, the church has tripled, quadrupled. Millions of people are coming to know Jesus in a way that they never thought could be possible in the midst of persecution. And then in 70 AD, do you guys remember 70 AD? Anybody around for that? 70 AD, this crazy thing happened that should have shown them that temple worship was done completely, that the temple in Jerusalem that had stood for so many years was actually destroyed. It was gone, thus ending the temple model of worship, and what Jesus had said has finally come to pass. It's over. It's all about how you love one another. And I want you to understand something. They never gave up meeting together like we're doing right now. They continued to meet together just like this, day after day sometimes, week after week sometimes. They met together to study like we're studying, to worship like we worship. They ate together. It was an incredible thing that they did. So Jesus wasn't saying stop this. He was saying that the way that people are going to know that you're my disciples isn't because you gather in a place. It's going to be because you love one another so well. And he made that very, very clear. And for the next several hundred years, this religion, Christianity, grew because the church loved each other so well. And they loved other people so well. Then, in the early 300s AD, anybody around for that one? Early 300s AD, something weird happened. There was this guy by the name of Constantine. You guys familiar with Constantine from your history books? And Constantine was the Roman emperor, or he was becoming the Roman emperor, and he was trying to make sure that it was just going to be him. And he saw this image in his dream that said, it was a cross, and it said, on this symbol, conquer. And he went on to conquer. And in that moment, the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, and he became the Holy Roman Emperor Constantine. The problem is that Rome was way more empire than it was holy, and he was way more emperor than he was holy. But what happened overnight, seemingly around 315 AD, was that Christianity went from being this persecuted small religion to being the overwhelming majority. And you know what they started doing? Since they'd become the majority and they were favored, they started building these big buildings. They went over to the place where they thought Peter had been buried, and they said, this is where Peter was buried. And they built this church. You know what they called it? Peter's. St. Peter's. And they said, this is where we're going to worship. We're going to go in here, and people are going to know that we're Christian, that we are a Christian nation, that we are a Christian empire by the buildings that we build. And they started instantly building these sacred places all over again. And then they started arguing about sacred texts or sacred documents. They actually started creating new ones. They didn't have the Bible the way that we have the Bible right now. They had the teachings and the writings of Jesus in different places. But they started writing these things called creeds. You ever heard of the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed? The incredible creeds. They started saying things like, I believe in God the Father, Almighty, maker of heaven and maker of earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son of God. But I want you to understand, this is so cool. There was this moment where that almost wasn't in there. There was this moment where there was this huge debate, and we were really close to it going the other way. There was this guy by the name of Arius who came around and said, actually, Jesus was not divine from birth. He wasn't God when he was born. He was later given his divinity when he was an adult because of the life that he had lived. And there was this debate that went on about this for a long time, and eventually they decided, no. Jesus was born divine as a baby, and so that's why those words got put into these creeds. But this was a big deal, and it was such a big deal. You see what they're doing? They're arguing about sacred documents in sacred places, about sacred people. And so they're going exactly back to this temple model idea. And it got to such a big deal that Constantine, the emperor, he actually wrote an edict about this. Check out what he said. He said this, and I hereby make a public order that if someone should be discovered to have hidden a writing composed by Arius, there's our guy, and to not have immediately brought forward and be destroyed by fire, his penalty should be what? Death. That's pretty intense, right? So essentially what Constantine said in a sacred place, a sacred person about a sacred document is, if you don't believe what we think you should believe, we're going to have you killed. You know what's so funny about this? There was not one, let me ask you this, how many people do you think were recorded in the Roman Empire during this period of time were recorded being killed because they refused to believe what they believed? How many people do you think? I don't know. I was hoping one of you guys had it. But let me tell you this. There's not one documented record of somebody being executed because they loved too little. And Jesus said, the world will know who you are because of the churches you build, the sacred documents you write, the sacred people you put in charge. No. He said, you will know who you are because of how you love one another. But we took something that was so simple and we made it so temple. You guys will get that on the way home. And we took something that was supposed to be so simple and we made it so complicated. And I think we lost something of extreme value. And then like 1,000 years go by in the early 1500s. Anybody around for that one? Early 1500s, there are these things called the Protestant Reformation takes place. There's a guy by the name of Martin Luther who comes around, and it's not Martin Luther King Jr. That's a different cause, another great cause, but a different cause. Martin Luther comes around, and he starts talking about how the church is wrong, and we need to have things based on grace through faith, and Scripture is our only authority and not the Pope. And he makes a lot of people mad, but he starts this thing known as the Protestant Reformation. It's why we're sitting here doing what we're doing today. Do you guys realize that there are now over 1,000 different branches of the Protestant Reformation that have sprung off from this? And do you know what separates these different branches? Sometimes we call them denominations. You know what separates us? Fighting over, or differences over, sacred texts. That's what separates us, over our interpretation, and it divides. When Jesus has said, I have made this as clear as I could make it, people are going to know who you are because of how you love one another. And somewhere along the way, we began to lose that. We began to miss it. And I wonder if Jesus is just standing up there in heaven looking out over the balcony, because I'm sure this is how heaven works, just standing there looking over the balcony like, I just can't believe this. I told them, and I told them. I've made it as clear as I could possibly make it for them. And look at what they're doing. They've made this such a temple thing again. And then Paul walks up and he's eating pizza, because I'm sure that's what we're all going to eat in heaven. I'm just really hoping. And he looks over, he's like, yeah, I thought I made it as clear as I could. Jesus, I told them. Matter of fact, I want you to read this again. If for in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. I told them, Jesus, they just missed it. And then Peter walks up and he's eating ice cream, because that's what we're going to have for dessert in heaven every day. I'm just really hoping. He's like, yeah, I remember when you told us this in the room. I remember really it coming into my heart and soul, and I got it in such a way that I never even thought I would be able to get it. But Jesus, this is a big deal. And I even wrote something about this. I wrote it like this: now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. Jesus, I told them too, but for some reason they're having a really difficult time with this. And so this morning, I want to just challenge our thinking real quick. I want to challenge the way that we think about things. I want us to kind of get back to the heart of what Jesus said. I want us to get back to the heart of when Jesus looked at his disciples and said, the world isn't going to know you because you go to church together. You should continue meeting together like we're doing here. You have to. But that's not how the world's going to know you. The world's going to know you when you love each other and you love the people around you really, really well. And I want us to learn to take that seriously. I want you and me to be challenged to love the people around me and the people around you like Jesus loved his disciples, by serving them, by taking the things that he had, the intelligence, the resources, the power that he had, instead of using it for himself, using it for them. I want us to enter into people's pain and sorrow with them and invest in them and bridge the gap for them when we can. I want us to learn to love people like Jesus loved people. And here's a question that we've asked here before. I didn't come up with it, but it's an incredible question to ask yourself, maybe even every day. What does love require of me? What does love require of me? When I go home, how many of you have ever felt worse about maybe not reading your Bible, or maybe you felt worse about not going to church sometime than you did about how you treated people in your own family? Or even that neighbor that drives you crazy still has 3 of your chainsaws, right? Or that guy that cut you off in traffic. Man, I think that sometimes we get more upset about the wrong things. Matter of fact, Jesus made this really clear. Another time he was talking, he said, you know, if you come to church, and at that point it was the temple, if you come to the temple and you've got your sacrifice, you know, at that point it was an animal, you're going to lay it on the altar and you're going to sacrifice it to God. If you're about to do that and you realize that you have some kind of issue with somebody in your life, a brother, somebody in your life that you've got a problem with, you need to leave that offering right there. And that was kind of dangerous, because in that day you could like get up and walk off, right? You need to leave it right there, and you need to first go make amends with your brother before you try to worship me. And that's like the modern day equivalent of us sitting here today, coming to worship God, and you walking into this building today and remembering, you know what? I've got a problem. Somebody has a problem with me. Something that I said or did. The way that I talked to my family this morning, the way that I talked to somebody on Facebook this week, the way that I talked to a coworker at work, man, we have a huge problem between us. I need to go and first make that right before I can even worship. Jesus was saying, if you want to get this relationship right, you have to first get this relationship right. And it was such a big deal. And so I want to challenge you this morning. Wake up every day and ask yourself this question: what does love require of me at home, with my spouse, with my kids, with my dog, with my cat? Well, who cares about the cat? But with my coworkers, with my friends, with my neighbors, with the random people that I'm going to meet that I have no idea who they are. What does love require of me? Because if I want them to know that I'm a follower of Jesus, I shouldn't tell them I go to church at Awaken. They should know by how I love the people around me. Let that be true of you, and let that be true of me, and let's just see what God can do through your life. Now, next week, we're going to wrap this series up. I want you to be here for it. Matter of fact, the next 2 weeks are extremely important. I'll let you know more about that next Sunday. But next Sunday's, the finale of this Follow the Leader, this is the one thing that Jesus may have wanted us to do almost more than anything else, but it's probably the one thing. No, it is the one thing that we probably ignore more than anything else. So you want to be here for next Sunday and bring somebody with you. Let's pray together to close out our time today. Father, again, thank you for your word. God, help us to take this seriously. That we're supposed to love one another. God, you made it as clear as you could possibly make it, that this is how the world will know who we are. Not because of our going to church, not even because of our sacred documents, but because of how we love the people around us. God, put it on our hearts and souls and minds today to love the people in our lives this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great Sunday, guys. We will see you back next Sunday at 9 or 10:30.
It will be my joy.